Welcome to the EnLight Life podcast with Alexandra Cousins. Together we'll demystify disease and the debates around health, empowering you toward real regeneration and a life of vibrant vitality.
Welcome to the EnLight Life podcast. I'm your host, Alexandra Cousins, and I am so excited and delighted today to be introducing you to Joel Greene's wonderful work. Joel Greene has absolutely opened something up inside of me. I can't remember, several years ago, I came across his work and I just remember thinking, this is different. This is a different voice. This is not someone that is trying to come with indoctrination and dogma, which is where at the time I was coming from. This is someone that is trying to make us understand how the human body, nutrition really work. And I'm interviewing him. I interviewed him. By the time you see this, it's been several months. And it was really such an exquisite conversation. And I'm such a huge fan of Joel. I've done his courses, I've read his books, and I cannot tell you how much benefit I have drawn from his teachings. And I continue to be inspired by his dedication towards really teaching us undogmatic truths. And what it leads to is to be completely liberated from all ideas of good versus bad, because the reality is there is no all good and all bad, whether we're talking food, compounds, diet styles, practices, everything is very much relative according to what is going on in our bodies currently. So I hope and trust that you're going to enjoy my interview with Joel Greene, and I certainly would encourage you to buy his book, any which one of his, but I thoroughly enjoyed the way, so many gems, so many takeaways, and I look forward to your feedback. So
No problem.
right off the bat, Joel, I just want to thank you obviously for being here. And really also just thank you for, which this is kind of what the conversation is going to be about today, for being such a real solid voice in the space of health, wellness, longevity, whatever we want to call it. And I say this as a recovering, or I would say I have recovered. I am a recovered extremist. And, I feel like I've done, pretty much all the extremes. And I feel for the people that are doing the extremes, thinking that that is what's going to resolve their issues, or thinking that they have found the answer forever. Because sometimes we do need to do certain extremes, and certainly that was my case. It's helped me, but then I got stuck in it, as we tend to do in a lot of things, right? We do something and we think this is the way and I'm going to be good forever, and then we kind of find out it's not. And so
Right.
when I read your book, and I have to say, I'm still chewing on everything that you are teaching 2 years or 2.5 years later. And I'm loving it. And each time I come back to your teachings, and of course, each time that I watch one of your reels, it's like, oh, here's a man who is just solid and who is real, which is what we need. And so I really want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you. That is so kind. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I really feel that is what the world out there today needs. So maybe, where do we want to start? I feel nutrition is still such a minefield. And I love what you said. I can't remember, it was in one of your courses, probably also in the book, where you said nutrition really is broken. Today's nutrition is broken. We are more confused than ever. There's so much information out there, and you think that we should really by now know how to eat, but we don't.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, and
Oh,
so maybe, maybe a place to start also is, how did you come to all of this wisdom? Because it really is wisdom. And yes, there's of course a lot of science behind it, and I love how you explain the science, but I feel ultimately, similar to where I am now, well, after 25 years of doing all kinds of crazy things, I feel like I'm finally coming to a place of wisdom. Hallelujah.
well, I think you hit it on the head. 25 years, and that's really the answer. It's what we have today is a space and an industry that is populated by people who 10 years ago were doing something else and have jumped to the forefront, professing things with extreme confidence that they haven't actually played out long enough to know how those things are going to impact you. And that's the truth. I mean, it takes 20, 25 years, 30 years to really see the long-term impact of what you're doing now. And so, because it takes so long, and so for me, like everything I'm doing is just out of hindsight. It's just out of having made all the mistakes and made all the, you know, done extremes and just figured out things the hard way. Usually paying a pretty heavy price for it. I see it all the time. There's just a very heavy price to be paid when you are experimenting on your body and disrupting what we call homeostasis. And that's such a key concept, I think, because once you understand that the body and all of the systems in it are always trying to maintain an equilibrium, the notion of life and the chemistry of life and the balance that it exists in, it happens in these very narrow tolerances. And so we can create shifts in those tolerances through inputs, food or oxygen or sunlight, many different things, sleep, and that the nature of those inputs can either optimize or disrupt homeostasis. And so this brings us to kind of a missing template that should exist but doesn't. And the reason it doesn't primarily is most of the advice givers haven't been around long enough to experience exactly what is in the template, which is that it's very possible to do something in the short term. Short term could be 5 years, could even be 10 years, that has a ton of benefits. And it seems, like you said, it's, oh, well, there we go. That's the way. That's it. But then you find out later on that there are all of these disruptions that take place from the very thing that created all these benefits. And all of a sudden, the negatives compound and they actually outweigh all the benefits. And in fact, the benefits tend to minimize over time. So that's a road that most people will find out for themselves. Just doing, things long enough, you're going to find out that's true. And I just try and come from a hindsight perspective of, hey, here's the road. You don't have to listen to me. That's fine. But I've been down that road and I can tell you, and so, yeah, I think for me, it's just, having listened to health advice from so many experts over the years, a lot of them really well credentialed, and applying it for a long time and finding out that didn't really work the way you said it would. So, yeah.
I agree. That's the crucial discernment that we need to be able to develop as a population, right? The fact that, yes, sometimes we can do something for a time that is so-called extreme, and you can get incredible benefits from it. Just basically, I would say my message these days is, you can do anything, just don't get stuck in it. Don't get stuck thinking that any of these extremes is the way. And ultimately, play around, really keep in touch with your body. And, hey, why not? We have all the modern testing, which even though we don't want to give it too much credit, there's also a place and time to do some testing and to kind of like maybe check yourself. And then already things become a lot more clearer when we don't buy into, these extremes for, wow, this is just the way that we should live.
Right. Yeah.
And so I wanna maybe go a little bit into, because I want to hear your input in terms of, so my extreme was, which I did for about 7 years. For 7 years, I was kind of 90% raw, sometimes 100% raw, and really very high fruit diet and a crap ton of fasting. It was like just fasting. And of course, yes, amazing benefits, if you will, mentally, spiritually, connection to nature and God and all the things. And it was wonderful until I hit perimenopause and my body was like, nah, now genetics are coming up. And, like, this is not the way that you're not from the tropics, honey. That was also part of the message. That's not where you originate from. And we're calling you back home to homeostasis, to kind of really connect with all that is real. And it's been a magnificent journey of, almost like finally fully embodying and going, okay, I've done all these extremes and now I'm just in this super happy medium, and there's no more tension. Because before there was a level of tension, living in the extreme, I had to be so vigilant about it. And so, yeah, I would love to hear, because I appreciate that you are not a no fruit kind of guy, which we have a lot of people out there nowadays screaming, no fruit, but you should take Akkermansia.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm always
Right.
like,
Yeah.
hang on, how does that work? Do we know what creates all the good bacteria? So yeah, maybe if you can speak to a little bit, what are the benefits of potentially fruit fasting? Don't do it for 7 years. But what are the benefits of even a plant-based diet? And yeah, maybe just what is your take on a plant-based diet?
I know a lot of people would disagree with me. I don't think it's a way to eat for life. I think it could be very helpful. I would explain it the same way I would, carnivore, which is, I think it could be very useful in the right context, very beneficial. I don't think it's a way to eat for. I don't think it's the optimum. I don't think it mirrors what you see in nature. It doesn't mirror what you would do in nature. So. And I have this totem that I keep trotting out on podcasts that I think is eventually going to catch on. And it's if you just went and you did a survival course or a survival show, you'll find what nature's eating rhythm is, and it's nature's rhythm of eating does two things. It leverages dietary diversity so that the downside of one particular food group is mitigated by the benefits of another. There's incredible synergies. It also keeps you from necessarily getting too much of anything, but it doesn't look like the 4 food groups. So in nature, you can have seasons where you might have a season where, wow, we last 3 months we've been eating tons of meat, but then that runs out. And then you have another season where maybe you find berries in bloom and you're eating tons of berries along with stuff. And so nature has variety and diversity in seasons, and just the nature of scarcity in nature, because we don't, it's not, the problem with like the modern carnivore diet, for example, is it's a diet of abundance. It only works if there's a refrigerator. You don't have that in nature. So with regard to plant-based diets, the first thing I would say is to understand that the language that we have been taught to think in, and I'm a firm believer that language dictates thought. the words you use program the mind. So when it comes to a plant-based diet, the words we use are super inadequate to actually describe the things that you're dealing with. So we use these words like carbs, and we use these words like fruit. That doesn't begin to describe what you're dealing with, because when you're dealing with foods, particularly like plant-based foods, they essentially are unique whole entities. Like think of a, it's a thing unto itself. It might possess fructose, in there, and oh my gosh, fructose is bad. No, it's not. Not in the context of the whole fruit. It's not. It doesn't. You can make a case it doesn't even hit the liver in that case. So you have to begin to look at expanding the words we use to describe these foods. So, example, when you look at certain types of legumes, we just bucket them under carbs, and oh my gosh, carbs are bad. But when you begin to break them down food by food, the differences and the benefits are mind-boggling. Like in my new book, I have this example where I take you through 3 different kinds of pulse crops, through black soybeans, chickpeas, and black beans. And this is based on scientific research that's looked at the impact of adding these different foods into the diet. And when you get down to the nitty-gritty, one of them increases PPAR gamma, another one decreases fat storage, and they're just very specific. Each one has very specific benefits, okay? So there can be a lot of horsepower in the plant world. Most of the drugs we know of are made from plants, and there can be a lot of benefits to that. I would just say the same thing I would say if somebody asked me about keto or carnivore, which is it could be a really good intervention. It just depends on what you need. I would offer that over the long term, there's really only one way, and that is through a diet that is balanced, nutrient dense, and diverse. And a diet that's balanced, nutrient dense, and diverse, again, doesn't have to look like the 4 food groups. It can have seasons. It can have a little bit more leaning into protein, a little bit more leaning into plants this season. You can have all that stuff in it. But I think the key is, if we all are going to accept this notion that nature is inherently optimizing, okay, that's the basis of biohacking. If you don't agree to that, then you don't agree to the whole thing. But if we're going to accept that proposition, and there seems to be quite a bit of evidence that's true, we can see that from scientific research with forest bathing. We can see that with grounding. We can see that with matching diurnal cycles of light and dark. You can see how pretty much when you sync up your biology with nature's rhythms, that an optimization tends to occur. So here's what's missing. And this is really, really mind-boggling. It's missing. This shouldn't be missing. It's the most important thing. If you just use a little bit of common sense and think about this, everything in nature that lives during its waking hours is obsessed with one thing, and that's getting food. Okay? Like the waking hours are entirely devoted to food, to getting food. And it turns out that if you want to embrace nature's rhythms, there are readily discernible and identifiable rhythms that are born out of nature for eating. And replicating those rhythms probably has quite a bit of benefit. And so what I would offer is that what happens in nature is scarcity immediately hits you in the face. You can't go to the fridge. Okay. You begin, in a place of looking for, okay, I got to go fish. I've got to set some traps. I've got to do something to get, some substantial food. There's a really good show I used to love called Dual Survival. And it had these two guys on it. One of them was the ultimate hunter. This guy was the greatest hunter I've ever seen in my life. This guy could do amazing things. I saw him shoot a wild turkey with a bow he made. I mean, crazy stuff. And the other guy was mainly a plant-based guy, and he would just forage for grubs and things like that. So, and what would always happen every episode is the plant-based guy would eventually give in and eat, he'd forage for grubs, and they'd both share in those, but they would, eventually just kill something and feast on that. And what happens in nature is scarcity does both. Scarcity the natural rhythm of eating in nature, scarcity, is that you're going to have preferences for food. Most people in nature will prefer animal foods, but they will subsist on plant foods until animal foods are available. And you never get too much of anything necessarily, unless you come across like a patch or like an orchard or something, and you gorge yourself on that. And so there's an unpredictability to nature. It's sort of unpredictable. And there are a few sure things you can count on. One is that that scarcity will create naturally diversity in your diet. So if nature's rhythm is bound in diversity, it kind of makes sense that we should try and mirror that to some degree. And it turns out there is really good scientific validation for this notion. I make the case in my new book that I could make a one-sided argument on any food, and I could be the most convincing guy ever that food's toxic. Okay, and I could turn it around and I could do the same thing, that it's life-giving. And that's because all foods to extremes over time begin to disrupt homeostasis. Just simply by the extreme nature of doing too much of one thing, it'll disrupt homeostasis in one way or another over time. And that nature protects us from doing that. It keeps us in a rhythm. Yeah. I could keep ranting, but I want to take a breath here and give you.
No, I love everything that you say and how you say it, because ultimately that is how I also came to my senses. And, I'm still, honestly amazed at how this whole process happened, because I was very ill on multiple levels when I started out. And ultimately, I also have to see how this whole extremism, it really brought me to a healing and becoming whole with nature, with life, with the rhythms. And at some point, when the extremes stopped serving me, my consciousness started to shift, and it was like, hang on, Alex, if you were to live in an abundant sort of homestead, right? Would you wake up every morning and eat the same things? And would you, if you see, and you're an innocent being, meaning you have not been indoctrinated by life, right? You're just living. And you would see an egg lying around. You want to tell me you wouldn't eat it? And if it tastes good, you wouldn't eat it again? Of course you would, right? I mean, that's how we work. And we eat fruit, and then we go, oh, this fruit really tastes good to me and feels good to me, and maybe the next one doesn't, and so forth. And so that is how we work as human beings. And same thing, if I'm living by a river or by the ocean, like I would never fish, like that just doesn't make sense. And that's how I came to my senses. So it was literally, this undoing, and this in some ways returning to innocence. And and then I found your work, and I was like, oh my gosh, and it was also like, how funny that that's when I found your work, because I was ready to hear it. And then it was just like, yeah, this, my whole mission has been really, we need to come back exactly to that, to our senses, to common sense. And then as you pointed out in several instances, I feel the biggest disease of our lifetime is that we have become so incredibly disconnected from life itself, from nature, which for me is the supreme. Nature is our master. And yet as humans, we want to keep being the bosses of nature.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. It's a very common story, actually. I find when you start talking about the 15-year range, you start to hear this story over and over. I don't know if you know of the Trim Healthy Mamas, Pearl and Serene, but I did their podcast recently, and Serene was talking about when she hit year 15 of the raw vegan plant thing, and teeth started falling out, and she came to, by a different route, the same realization. And I think kind of that 0 to 10 years is kind of the BS zone where you can kind of say anything and get away with anything because the template is missing to understand the road.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think it's a valuable exercise here to kind of lay that out. And once you get this, it makes perfect sense and it explains everything. Okay, and it's that homeostasis actually has identifiable forces that disrupt it. There are 4 principally. You can think of the analogy being similar to the 4 fundamental forces in physics. Well, it turns out homeostasis has 4 forces you can identify. And the first is degradation. Okay. So as you do a thing, a given way of eating, you get all the benefits. Okay. And then what can happen though over time is by virtue of taking in too much of one thing and not enough of another, you can starve something out or you can overtax something. And so something can wear out somewhere. So you see a lot of this with long-term sort of fasting, carnivore-ish. What happens long-term is you have too much akromansia doing that. And then what happens is too much akromansia will degrade the gut lining. So you see a degradation taking place, okay? And you could explain degradation across 50 different mechanisms, but you'll see something wears out somewhere. Another one is compensation. So compensation is a force of homeostasis that takes place when we do something too much for too long, and there's a compensatory effect. So a good example would be insulin function with respect to glucagon. So if you're doing low carb too long, okay, so one of the great things about low carb is it raises glucagon, which helps you burn fat. And one of the bad things about low carb is that it raises glucagon, which long term, so it was beneficial in the short term, but long term, there's a compensatory effect. And so what you see is that the body becomes resistant to glucagon. You can have chronically elevated glucagon. Okay, so that there's a compensatory effect there, and that would be that you have elevated glucagon that leads into all kinds of issues. Okay, and it's by the body trying to compensate for some deficit or something too much somewhere. Another one is attenuation. Okay, so attenuation, we're all kind of familiar with that. That's a good example is you just have a diet way too high in carbs and sugar, and over time the receptors kind of attenuate to that. They get blunted, and it takes a lot more insulin to trigger the receptor. Okay, so you have compensation, attenuation, degradation, and then you also have another force, which is that where am I at here? Let's see, compensation, degradation, attenuation, and I'm blanking on one sec here. I'm brain farting on my own thing here. One second here.
Accumulation, where there's an over.
Oh yeah, accumulation.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, accumulation. So thank you. Yeah, you can have an accumulation as another force of time. So something accumulates, and this is kind of easy to see. There's a lot of ways you could see this. So example would be you're having just too much leafy greens in the diet. You can accumulate metals. You can accumulate nickel, for example, or you're having maybe just too much protein in the diet for too long, and you're accumulating ammonia in the gut. Okay, so once you get this, these are real things. Like, I'm not making anything up. I'm just identifying things that are in your face and have been there forever that no one's bothered to elucidate. And once you get this, you now have a template to understand what's going to happen over time. Okay. So yeah, I'm going to go do this particular diet. It's a little extreme and it's fine because I'm not doing it long enough to accumulate anything, and I'm not doing it long enough to create any kind of attenuation or degradation or compensation. Now you have a pair of glasses for the road ahead that's been sorely needed and been completely missing. And this is why I say that nutrition is 10 years behind, because this is something should have been identified decades ago. Like, just common knowledge with anything to do with nutrition, that homeostasis is what matters. these four forces can act on homeostasis. And once you understand these four forces, it explains everything you see long term. When you start talking like to the low carb crowd, which, and I have hundreds of these, which is, yeah, I did it for a long time. It was great. I lost fat. My insulin sensitivity went up. Everything was great. And then I don't know, about year 6, I started having gut issues, and now I'm pre-diabetic and I don't understand what happened. And you hear this all the time, and it's well, I can tell you what happened was attenuation, degradation, that's what happened, and then it disrupted homeostasis. So that is an essential understanding. I think that in 10 years, I think it will be something everybody understands just because we're talking about it, but it's missing.
So ultimately, I always come back to, we need to come back to nature, to the understanding. We need to become observant of nature. Instead of, I think we've become a society, most people's favorite phrase is science says.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Like at some point, science says this and this makes you happy. Well, does it? Do you know what makes you happy?
Right.
Can we just stop this? Yep. Yes, science has its place, and I actually have become or returned to a great love for science for some things. But ultimately, it is about remaining, neutral enough or observant enough to kind of really tap into our common sense. But I feel we can only have common sense when we realize that nature is already perfect, and we're coming in, and we are coming in as little guys learning from it, playing as if we're the masters, and we're still learning the basics from nature, which in some ways brings me to the conversation of biohacking, which is another sort of, there's a bit of there's a fascination with biohacking, and there's also a great resistance, especially to the word itself. I like biotuning because, if we think that we can hack, sure, we can. We can hack our biology, we can hack nature, we can hack anything. But as you already pointed out, there's always a great price to pay when we think we can hack something and get away with it. And so I prefer the term biotuning. But let's maybe talk about, biohacking, because it feels like biohacking has become sort of the ultimate thing to do out there. If you're a biohacker, then, you're in the know, or you're on the cutting edge. And I think that's, again, another practice that, yeah, we can do a little bit of it, and we can, get into the understanding of what can be tuned into a certain way. But if we then overdo it, even something like cold plunging becomes, a negative for our body.
Yeah. Yes. So this is a big topic, I think. You kind of have some extremes out there. You have the Peter Attia extreme where, biohacking is rubbish. And then you have kind of the Dave Asprey where biohacking is all, and somewhere in the middle, there are things that are useful. For me, the path I took was that I was really just I was a athlete and a fitness devotee most of my life, and I really drank the Kool-Aid of fitness, which essentially elevates physical appearance to the highest value. Okay, so that's the most important thing, is how you look. Okay, and along my journey, what I discovered was, number one, there were a lot of people that looked really good that behind the scenes were kind of sick. They weren't really in great health. And then I discovered that for the most part, the only way to get the thing, to obtain the prize, was that you couldn't work in real life. You had to, you had to quit real life, go be in this bubble of fitness, do that full time, and take a bunch of drugs. And I just found, for me, that under real life pressure, the ethos of fitness could not hold up. And the ethos of fitness is, you hear these platitudes like, well, you got to make the time, you got to put in the work, and you hear all this stuff. But I believe most of the people saying that have never had a real job. That's my belief. Okay, and I think it holds up when you go and take it when you dissect that. So, for me, the hacking came out of a very distinct moment in 2005 when I had just gotten fat from working 14 hours a day in a tech startup, and I'd been really, I was really fit 3 years earlier. I'm really fit, like ripped abs and everything, and that was because in the 3 years prior to that, I had time to work out. I lost my .com job in 2000, and I thought, well, I'll go make websites, and I had a little business doing that, and my clients were fitness stars, and I had time to work out, so I was in really good shape. And then the constraint of real life took all that time, wiped it to zero, and I didn't have an answer. I got fat. So for me, the hacking part started just by staring at a plate of food and just writing notes around it, like, what could I have done differently during this period that would have, and I started coming up with like essentially food hacks, like, well, I could have combined this with that. I could have, and so for me, all of like what you would call the hack kind of came out of like necessity. Like example is in my first book, there's a concept called the integrated interval that has been copied, borrowed, stolen, rephrased, renamed. Now you hear it by the name of, exercise snacks or, microdosing exercise. That's where it came from, was in my first book. And that was out of necessity. That was just purely out of like not having time to do the fitness thing. Well, what works instead? And so what works is, I'm going to go get off my desk, run to the parking lot, run a sprint, and I'll just come back, and that worked. And as I went a little further down the road, basically the thing that I kind of figured out was that there are some mechanisms in the body that matter more than others in terms of if they don't work, then the whole ship sinks. And they're quite easy to identify. It's not that difficult, So one was the microbiome. And that one is very easy to identify. Everybody was at the time talking about, nobody was, well, actually, so I started the whole microbiome thing really, really early, like 2007, 2006. And there were no gut gurus. Nobody was onto that. And I was just kind of on this voyage of discovery, and I had this software I had developed, and we had thousands of clients with major corporations, and I was able to kind of tweak and tune that and figure out. And the things that I was able to see was that, gosh, just by targeting two bacteria, Bifido and Akkermansia, you can wipe out cravings overnight. You can wipe out food intolerances overnight. You can get people to start really dropping fat. That was like really powerful. Like, wow, okay. And at the center of that is the gut immune axis. So Bifidobacteria is the center of the human gut immune axis. It's the one that interfaces most with dendrites and antigen sampling. And it works in concert with Akkermansia to modulate IgA and a whole lot of other immune mechanisms. And those tie in one way or another directly into the way that we eat, our drive to eat. And that runs very much in parallel with the need to oxygenate the body during sleep. And what happens is when the body's not oxygenating during sleep, which happens to everybody with age, you begin to stabilize the oxygen sensor switch, which is HIF1. And when you stabilize that switch into an on state, now you're promoting cancer, you're promoting obesity, you're promoting rapid aging, everything bad, nothing good when that's stabilized. And that was another easy fix. It's like, wow, okay, there's a few things that go wrong that we can fix. And that just kind of led me down this road that was very much immune centric. It wasn't, I would call it, I wouldn't really even call it biohacking. I would just call it an immune centric approach to health, which involves some basic simple things that create huge probabilistic changes over time, little changes now that create massive probabilities over time. So if we can just get you oxygenating better, if we can correct the microbiome, if we can begin to correct issues with circulation, all these things, then long term, you're going to see dramatic differences in the things that really matter, the things that really, really, really matter. Mobility and flexibility is in that too. And, for me, coming out of like the fitness background, which is kind of hard baked into bodybuilding, I knew so many bodybuilders, fitness people that had no athletic ability. I mean, they looked great. They looked big, but they didn't have, if they had to do anything athletic, they'd tear every muscle in their body. And that very much parallels what happens in aging. So in aging, you see very distinct shifts. One is the weakness of the feet. The feet begin to get weak. The muscles shorten and tighten. You begin to lose the type 2 fast twitch muscle fibers. I mean, there's very readily identifiable things that happen. And those things have a greater weight than a lot of other things because you start to see falls, you start to see mobility issues. And so by just focusing on a very narrow band of things, most of which converges on the immune system, you could create massive difference long term. And I've seen that play out. I have a pretty good advantage over most of the people that do this in that because I had a software and I had literally tens of thousands of people come through that software, I have large data sets where I could just see what worked and I could see what mattered the most and I could see what really works. And how to fix those things. So I just kind of know. I'm at a point now where I guess I know, and I've seen it many, many times where just creating these very few small shifts can have a massive difference. I think in the realm of biohacking, there's been a lot of stupidity, like just stupid to the point of like doesn't even make any sense. An example would be wearing blue blockers during the day.
Yeah.
So you see everybody doing that now. Everybody's wearing blue blockers during the day, and it's like, okay, you understand during the day, blue light is essential. You need blue light during the day. It's bad at night, but it's essential during the day. And wearing blue blockers during the day, you're pushing back sleep onset. Okay, so you need blue light exposure during the day. Where you don't need it is at night. And so you see this thing with biohacking that has kind of become, like you said, kind of just taking it and running with it to the point where there's no boundaries. Like, oh, well, blue blockers are good, therefore I'll wear them all the time. Cold plunging is good, therefore I'll do it all the time. And it really gets to this this way that I think this entire generation, us included, have been trained to think, which is, to think in terms of polarities, like, well, it's either got to be good or it's got to be bad. But the same thing that's good short term can be bad long term. And the same thing that's good in one context can be bad in another. And that's just how the body works. So sorry for the long rant, but
No, that's why we're here. We're here to hear your long rants. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I feel in today's world, you can't have proper conversations that are nuanced, right?
right.
Right. Everything is either black or white, right or wrong, this or that, and God forbid you start bringing in, well, there's the sometimes, there's the intermittent, there's the cycling. Because in many ways, I still do a lot of what I used to do. I just don't do it all the time. And that has brought so much more flexibility, freedom, enjoyment. It's like, wow, I mean, life is actually so fun when you know what to do in order to keep yourself healthy. And when you know what to do, how, in case when you went overboard somewhere, it's like, wow, okay, now I get this whole thing, which for a long time I didn't. I get how fun life can be and how enjoyable. But gosh, it really evaded me for a very long time. And, it's like, okay, now finally past middle age, we're getting there. So, better late than never.
Well, you don't look middle-aged.
Thank you. But it's this concept really that I'm such a huge fan of now. Like, can we have nuanced conversations? Can we start thinking a little bit more with softness around life. And I also love that you brought up the fact, really from an insider perspective, that yes, a lot of people who are in the fitness industry, and I've seen these people come to me and show up on my screen looking like the perfect model. And I'm going, what do you want from me? And then they tell me all of their health issues. And that was my eye opener, because my whole life, I thought, looking from the outside, I thought that all these people that looked so perfect, well, they're just in the most perfect health. And over the years, I've learned it does not mean a single thing. And that on the opposite,
Right.
someone can be kind of, really like average looking, but be in superb health and vitality and all the things. And I think that's also a very important message, especially in today's world of social media, where everybody has perfect skin, perfect bodies, perfect hair. Well, you don't know what's underneath. Is their hair sewn in? Is it real? You have people, and I've had them on my podcast, which then I decided not to air, because I've had women who very clearly had plastic surgery swear to me that it was all natural.
Right.
I mean, at the very least, let's be honest, right? Like, let's be honest.
Yeah.
We can, like, how wonderful that we can also have plastic surgery, and there's times when I think, well, maybe give me another couple of years and I might go for that as well, because why not? As long as we keep our priorities right, which is exactly what you're saying. We need to keep, also this concept of healthy feet. Most people don't know about just how important feet are. They kind of tend to, be left by the wayside. And funny enough, especially by these fitness gurus, who oftentimes I look at people's feet and I go, those don't look good. Those look scary. So yeah, I love these long rants, and I think this is what people need to hear. And of course, by now, if you're listening to this podcast, I would say if you're going to read one book, and I'm very, very picky these days, whose books or information I take in, I would say it's your book is a must read, just for a complete consciousness reset around health and wellness and longevity. What I want to get into, sort of in, maybe in closing, what is your take? And maybe you have, words of wisdom for, especially for women. I mean, men also, andropause, women, perimenopause, menopause, because I'm looking at that. And what I find a bit scary is how these days everyone who is anyone is just screaming hormones for everyone, right? And we're just dosing everyone with hormones. And nobody's going, hang on a moment. What dictates the hormones? Why are so many women having these terrible, excuse my French, shitstorms in perimenopause, right? Like, I mean, outright, like, and I was one of them. Because, and why was I in such a shitstorm? Because what I was doing for 7 years prior took me out of harmony. And so when I started going to the experts, because initially I was like, okay, I'm not a hormone expert. I'll go to the hormone experts and I'll see what they have to say. Well, all they had to say at the time, 4 years ago, at 47, highest doses of hormones for you. That's, you're not going to get around that. If you want to kind of like save yourself from the misery and lose the weight and, kind of like all the things that come with it, you got to be on high levels of hormones. And that, once again, it just didn't resonate with me. And now I'm thinking, thank goodness, because not that I'm excluding hormones forever, but I'm doing just fine, just from, going back to the basics and sort of rectifying a lot of things. And I found a lot of amazing answers in the Russian healthcare system, which is about peptide bioregulators, or at least a part of the Russian healthcare system, which is about peptide bioregulators, endocrine health. And that for me was just life-changing. It was like, oh my gosh, it was like switching a light switch back on, because of course, when the endocrine system is strong, when our immune system is strong, when our gut microbiome is strong, chances are our hormones are also going to do pretty well.
Yeah, Curious, did you do pinealon?
Yes, endolutin.
Oh, okay. What did you think of it? Did you notice anything?
Yeah, I can only say, so I did the natural one, endolutin,
Yep.
right away. And I would say within 2 weeks, so this is a funny story, within 2 weeks, I went from, being this kind of like typical perimenopausal bitch in all senses to back to normal. It was literally like a light switch went off. And I remember when I felt all these switches taking place, I was bobbing around in the ocean with my husband and kids, and I felt this total euphoria, and I could feel the power of these peptide bioregulators. And my immediate next thought was, oh crap, I can't remember feeling this good, this balanced. Is this a Russian bioweapon?
Interesting. Well, you've motivated me to break out my endolutin in the cupboard and give it another try.
Yeah. I mean, I literally had, and then I caught myself with that thought, and I'm like, okay, that's an interesting thought. And then I just went deeper with the bioregulators. And so, yeah, we've been using them for 4 years. I mean, they literally reversed every single perimenopausal symptom. In the meantime, yes, I also do use some injectable peptides, but my first love is definitely the bioregulators. And when we look at the science around the bioregulators, it's what makes the most sense, because they work on a DNA level, they work in a regenerative way. The injectables to me are kind of like the bonus, and they're wonderful for so many things, but the bioregulators is definitely what did it for me.
I might give them another. I did a course of bioregulators. I didn't really notice anything, but you've actually motivated me to give another go of that. I think to your question regarding women's issues, I think you sort of hit on it, which is that it's very easy to go, okay, well, this is just hormones, but there's actually a fairly important checklist to go through to make sure these other things are as optimized as they can be. And so, it's not a difficult list to figure out. It's, the gut, the immune system, insulin function, so one of the issues you get with perimenopause, menopause is you get insulin resistant. And a lot of people now are, so insulin sensitivity has never been under assault in history like it is today, and it's an across the board problem that everybody's facing. And there's a lot of reasons why insulin sensitivity issues are so widespread. But you can just simply look at the success of the GLP-1s, and what that tells you, it's a smoking gun going, oh wow, so everybody's insulin resistant. Wow. Okay. So a lot of women's issues can be mistaken. You can just have the sort of general insulin resistance that seems to be plaguing everybody now, and just think that those are female issues, and it very well may be conjoined with that, but it could be also just the fact that your insulin sensitivity is terrible. Yeah. So I think that, to your point, there's a list of things that along the way you want to make sure are optimized anyway, and in the process of doing that, like in your case, if you're feeling pretty darn good and amazing, well, then that's a judgment call if you want to go with the bioidenticals. I'm a fan. I think at some point they do a lot of good. The evidence there is that they work better earlier versus later. So later they can be actually kind of problematic if you wait too long to take them. So I think that there's a good case to be made for them, but also I think, to your point, which is that I wrote a couple of chapters about this in my new book, which is thought itself, the ability to think coherently, the ability to think independently is really under assault. I mean, and it's under assault in a way that's never happened ever in human history, at least in modern history that we know of, which is that in order to have common sense, there has to be a framework for reality that's common to everybody, that everybody buys off on. Okay. And then from that, you can make sense of things. Well, that doesn't exist anymore. That doesn't exist. There isn't a common framework for reality. And so without that, without a common framework, what we find is that authority, both on an individual and an institutional level, becomes elevated. And so it really is a form of infantilization. It's a form of taking adults and making them behave exactly like dependent children. In fact, there's a whole psychology to it. You got to talk in you got to talk in the Barack Obama voice, or you got to talk in the Ward Cleaver voice, which is now children. You kind of talk in that voice, and speak with absolute surety and put officiality on it. And what happens is it turns us into kids. And I see this at the highest levels. I see people with the highest credentials who just cannot think because they've been dogmatized into this authoritative submission, and they were taught this is reality and that's it. And so that's happened, and that has really made it difficult to have nuanced conversations with people where we can have a common ground, which is common sense. And that is something that is going forward essential, is returning to sense, returning to common. Like if something doesn't make sense in our society right now, one of the biggest telltale signs is that we have elevated the highest value now is plausible denial. And that's insane if you think about it. The highest value is, I don't know. We don't know that for sure. That's the highest value. And sometimes there are things in life that are so darn obvious. It's like, what do you mean? It's obvious. This is obvious. So what happens is an over-reliance on authority figures destroys the ability to see what's obvious. And so then you don't know up from down, and you're dependent on authority figures to tell you what up and down is. And then they disagree. One says that's up and the other says, no, that's down. And then you get to this place of, well, I don't know who to believe, right? Well, that's because we have lost that common framework that we derive common sense from. That's the problem. And returning to common sense, returning to sense, things that, I talk about it in my new book, which is, at the core of that, ancestrally speaking, there's this massive importance on not being crazy, on being sane, on seeing reality, on doing sensible things, because you can't survive as a small band of people in nature without it. You've got to have your finger on the button of reality. And it's just to say that there's been this operation that has been performed on all of us in this era, which is to be submissive to all of the trappings of authority. And I see it all the time. I see guys in this industry who speak with utter authority and don't know what they're talking about. I mean, I see it all the time. I mean, I've seen things like, utter confidence, utter authority, saying things like, the liver is the only place in the body where fatty acids are converted into energy. Like, oh my gosh, you shouldn't be in this business. You don't know what you're talking about. That's not true. And I see stuff like that all the time. I see things like, the only way to know truth is randomized control studies. RCTs are the only way we know if something's true. That's not true. That is not true. That's not even close to true. There's evidence showing that the difference statistically between epidemiological studies and RCTs is negligible. It's negligible. In fact, when you study RCTs, what you find is it's big pharma science. The only way RCTs have value is when you do them in huge populations. That's the only way they really work. They don't really work that well. In randomized control studies, don't work that well with small populations. The bigger the population, the more accurate, the better it is. Well, the problem is nobody can afford that except big pharma. Okay. So RZDs are big pharma science. Doesn't mean they're not valuable. Like if we want to have a nuanced conversation, we can certainly say, yeah, they're absolutely valuable, but they're not perfect. They're highly prone to certain types of statistical errors, and very often the epidemiological data is just as good. And there are people way above my pay grade that would argue that would tell you exactly that. And so it's this thing of demagoguery and just an over-reliance on authority. And a lot of people have been able to take advantage of that to just speak with absolute certainty, absolute authority. And you just, as a consumer, you have to understand very often they don't know what they're talking about. Like they're talking about things that I, as a consumer, have taken a long time to look at. And like, I know you don't know what you're talking about. So, yeah, just getting back to like not being so polarized when we're talking about things. Like, we don't understand how the body works. I mean, we know in part, we see in part, but there's always new revelations and things that, and the most sacred cows that people think are just, beyond question, they're not. Everything's open for debate when it comes to biology. Like, we don't 100% know, that's the answer. So, and anyway, sorry, another rant.
No, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, yeah, what is most necessary is to be able to, besides the nuanced conversations, to also factor in that we don't know everything yet. We only know what we know or what we think we know. And also, sometimes I when I listen to people, I think, are we forgetting that we are still constantly evolving, that there is constant new revelations, new information coming? So how can we talk with this absolute certainty, especially even around things like hormones? I've had a lot of conversations with people in the industry, and what I find interesting is that a lot of the veterans of the industry, who they've been around forever, they really know their stuff. They know a lot of the people and experts, and they're going, well, hormones are so absolutely finicky that we don't know everything about them yet. Maybe with AI, and this is what I have a good feeling, by feeding all of the information into AI that we have around hormones, because there is such an interplay, right? The minute that we work with one hormone, everything else gets moved around as well. And that maybe AI can help us figure out the hormone thing. Because from what I've seen, most practitioners out there are too bullish and too kind of, freestyle about hormones. And there isn't enough, I don't know, like a little bit of, what's the word? Humility towards the complexity of the hormonal household. I guess that's what it is.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's a, the scary / fascinating thing with AI is that it's impossible to understand a cell for a human. It's impossible. There's just way too many interactions, the complexity, but it is probably possible for AI to actually map cellularity down and then go tissue by tissue and and from there possibly map out post-translational modifications. And so we're at a big fork in the road where with AI things are going to happen fast, and it's difficult to predict, but a lot is going to be made possible with the application of AI to biology to under, I just always marvel at, like, I spend a lot of time looking at, papers in biology, and I can tell you that the integrated complexity you see in even just subsystems of things, it defies the ability of us to really understand what's going on. So you're looking at nanotechnology that is so advanced. I'll give you an example. So DNA requires DNA DNA has a folding structure or storage structure. So when it's not being read, it's compacted down into these structures. And those structures at the core level are maintained by these proteins called histones. And the histones act as a locking mechanism for the DNA. So they keep it in these structures. And in order to read DNA, you have these different processes that can be performed on histones. You've got methylation, you have HDAC, you have phosphorylation. It's not just methylation. There are several processes that can be performed. But when you begin to break that down, and then you look at specific types of cells, like you look at neurons, and you look at histones in neurons, and you find that certain tissues, certain specific types of cells have residues on certain proteins, certain histones. A residue is so proteins are molecular machines, and a residue is the component that is the pure amino acid. And you can have residues that they act as on and off switches for different protein functions. And so you can have different residues on the same protein that are in fact kind of the same residues, but because of the location, post-translational modifications will activate certain aspects of that residue, and then the individual residues crosstalk, can talk to each other. And it's like when you start to get into this, the complexity you're looking at just quickly shoots to this level that, my gosh, what the heck are we staring at here? You're looking at machinery that it defies our ability to understand it. It gets so complex and so intricate, and that's just, I'm taking one tissue, one cell, one type of residue, and then you multiply that times, every amino acid known that can be used as a residue in millions of post-translational modifications in different kinds of tissues, and the whole thing talks to itself. So there has to be, anybody that's looked at this for any length of time should be sufficiently humbled, in talking about it, because we can kind of speak to it, but we always have to reserve ourselves in terms of, like, I don't know everything. Yeah, it could be, maybe. Sure. It's that complex.
It is. Yeah, we can say, we're all trying our best, but can we say for certain no, because nature and how and even just the complexity of the human body, it's awe-inspiring. How can you can't look at these deeper mechanisms and go, what intelligence created us, and then we want to come in and be more intelligent. I don't think we're we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, that's the scary part, for sure.
So in closing, because I did read somewhere, that I think you said as you turn 60, you're going to be considering testosterone therapy, and I can't remember, maybe something else. And so I would love to hear from you, as you get older, what are some of the, whatever, for lack of a better word, do we call them biohacks? What are some of the tools, the tricks that we can, that you feel, because I do think it's a very individual choice also, that you feel you are wanting to embrace, and it also maybe makes sense for you, right? Because I want to preface it by saying my view on all of this is, it's wonderful that we can lean incredibly deeply into just nature, and we can learn so much from it and live an amazing life. And we can also utilize some intelligent biohacks to, embellish, maybe prolong. I'm not so much for prolongation of life. I'm more for, how high of a quality of life am I living now? And then if I get to live longer than I thought I might, or, should have, I don't know if that's even possible, great. But I just want to feel great every day now.
Yeah, so I would say number one, top of the list is hyperbaric therapy. Number one. That's the apex biohack of all. Most people, most people that have tried it haven't like unless you've tried it in a 1.7 or higher chamber, you really haven't tried it. But what the hyperbaric solves a massive problem, which is that if you want to try and simplify the body into an equation, it's energy production. Okay, energy production drives the entire body. You got to produce energy in every cell, 24/7. And as you get older, what happens is the conduit for the main sort of let's call it fuel source for energy production, which is oxygen, the vasculature is winding down, and there are dozens of changes that are taking place, and so the ability of the furnace to get the coal that it needs, so to speak, is diminishing, and when that happens, the body starts aging at an accelerated rate. Example is, as we get older, the cardiovascular system has a lot of changes. It tends to degrade. Mechanisms in it, the glycocalyx and the NOx enzymes tend to go the wrong direction, and blood cells themselves begin to change. Your red blood cells, so when you're young, they're flexible, but as you get older, they get rigid. And in the microcapillaries and microvasculature of the tissues, you're just taking one red blood cell at a time. Well, what happens is very often those red blood cells have to deform in shape, and so as you get older, they get kind of rigid. And so what begins to happen over time is that in addition to that, your blood cells clump together, and so you're not oxygenating the microvasculature. The microvasculature is not getting red blood cells. So the hyperbaric solves that problem. Because under pressure, pressure is probably the greatest single modality. Like there have been, you have people now on the extreme bandwagon of, oh, the answer is the sun. That's the answer to everything. If you just go in the sun, it'll solve everything. Which is absurd, because all you got to do is go down to Florida and look at bunch of overweight people on the beach with great suntans, and it's like, why aren't they skinny? They're in the sun. Why? What happened? You could take someone. This has been done. You could take a person, put them in artificial light for 60 days in a submarine, okay, and bring them up, and they've de-aged 20 years in artificial light. And the answer is pressure. Okay, so yeah, and you could do a study with identical twins. You could take two twins. One of them, have them go in the sun every day, and the other, put them in a submarine, put them 100 feet under the water, do it for 60 days each one, come back and measure, and the guy in the submarine in the artificial light will be 20 years younger in terms of his telomeres than the guy who was in the sun every day. Okay, that's just the power of pressure, and the hyperbaric solves a lot of problems. What I found that it does is it basically reaches into your 20s, and it grabs that feeling you had of just being always on, and it downloads it into your 60-year-old body. You're just always on. Like, I'm just always on with it, So hyperbaric's top of the list. And then I wanted to do TRT this year, mainly because there's a big aging wave that happens at 60. The thing right now is there's some masters track and field competitions that I'm doing this year, and the regulations are that I would have to go get an exemption to take TRT, and it's a very long process, and I mean, very long. So I don't right now know. Probably doubtful I'll be able to do it before end of year, because I they're going to test you, and at least for what I want to do, they'll test me, and so I don't know if I'll be able to do that, but I am doing peptides. I'm taking MK677 to make up for that. MK677 and SLU PP332. So I'm taking those two peptides to kind of make up for that. So we'll see how that goes. But I feel pretty good. Yeah, I just last week got on the track and ran a pretty good 100-meter time. Like, okay, wow, I'm right there. I'm right where I want to be. So yeah, but then another one is senolysis. So at this age, you have to perform senolysis at least once a year, preferably twice. Flushing senolytic cells is a huge deal. It's a huge deal. And very soon, there will be NKT cells available in the regenerative medicine market where you can really go at this. So for now, what we have is kind of like keto diets and fisetin and, moxicillin and, a few things that can do it. But it's absolutely essential to do senolysis on a regular basis here at this point. And then I would say just physically, it's very, very important to do athletic movements at this age. So like for me, my training now, I'm doing very little bodybuilding stuff that I used to do. Almost all my training revolves around mobility and flexibility and stuff on the track and pushing strength through the feet and all of the things that you lose with age, athletic ability. And so just about everything I do focused around that. And that's a huge, huge thing. There's this push I've seen to get people, it's a totem, which is you got to go build muscle. Look, I spent 50 years in that in that silo. I can tell you where that goes. That whole strategy, you're going to blow your shoulders out, you're going to blow your knees out, you're going to blow your neck out, you're going to blow your lower back out. So training the body in an athletic way where you are emphasizing being able to push strength through the feet, you're emphasizing flexibility, mobility, the ability to make rapid directional changes. That will serve you really well. And it's not to say that muscle is not important. It is. But what's going to make a difference in your life is the things that matter most if you lose, which is mobility. You lose that, forget it. So that's kind of a short list, I would say. Oh, and on top of that, just the basics of the immunity code, which is you keep the gut optimized, you eliminate hypoxia during sleep, and those things.
Would you say at some point, maybe only in your mid-60s or early 70s, is there a place for things like human growth hormone or there's so many things out there, but, some of the more, if you will, controversial things, which, a little bit like peptides and specifically the GLP-1s, to me, there's a vast difference between doing a touch of something versus, what, like with the GLP-1s, especially the doses that are commonly recommended, I find insane. Whereas if one does a fifth, a seventh within the context of doing everything else, one can have amazing benefits without the downsides. One can come off, move on with life, right? Like you've gotten the benefits, you move on. And so I wonder, I don't know enough about human growth hormone and the other sort of, similar fancy things out there. Do you feel that there's a place for that potentially or not?
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, I'll do all that stuff. I'm open to what works at the right time in the right way. Me personally, I saved, the TRT and stuff like that until this age specifically because that's when you need it. And so there are very conspicuous waves of aging where everything hits you all at once. 58 to 60 is definitely one of them. Early 70s is another one, and you have to counter everything that's going on there. And the point is, I don't necessarily care if I live 120 years. I mean, but I'd like to live, a good 90 or 100. Not too far from this. I don't necessarily want to be old. I don't want to be old. I as much as I can stay in this range, that's the goal. So, whatever's on deck, I'm totally open to. But you have to, you just have to. I just caution and being careful is kind of how I look at it. There's always a price to something, and done the right time, the right way, you can usually do something. But it's very easy to do do something in the wrong way, and that's the thing. So, and with the GLP-1s, I'm starting to change my mind a little bit on that. Initially, I was very much in the camp of I think they're really serving an essential function, because I've seen people who cannot lose weight. It doesn't matter what you throw at them, and it's very important it's more important to get the weight off than not, for a variety of reasons. Some of the data that's starting to come out is a little concerning with regard to what it does to the gut, and contracting the gut and all that, and some of these other things. So I'm not against them. I'm just a little less for them than I was. I'm just kind of cautious and waiting to see what the data says. So me at this time, I wouldn't do one myself, just because of some of the long-term concerns, even though there could be some great short-term benefits. I want to just be cautious. And something with the GLP-1s, I think that's important to remember, is that those are synthetic. That's synthetic GLP-1. It's not human GLP-1. They have altered the amino acid in the number 8 and the 26th position, if I remember correctly. So this is an engineered GLP-1. That's why it lasts in the gut so long. And I'm just cautious, that's all, on that.
Yeah. No, I think it's important to look at all of these tools, once again, through the eyes of caution, scrutiny, and with the understanding that ultimately what we want to be doing long term is we want to do the things in a natural way, and in a way that targets all of the most important systems. And I think when we live that way, which is what you also outline in your books, we can only but certainly increase our health, improve our life, and still live well without, because as you pointed out, like a lot of the things that are proposed in the biohacking world, sometimes I listen to all of these lists, and it's like, where do you get the time to still live? If you're busy doing all of these things all day long, I mean, that's like half the day gone. I want to live, and ultimately, not just for me, living is I want to be in touch with nature as much as possible, because nature is what informs everything about my consciousness, or a lot of it at least. And so I want to be in nature. I want to have time to be absorbing nature. And then if we can do some biohacks on top of it, yeah, sure, we'll play with those as well. Well, Joel, I appreciate this conversation, and, really appreciate the human that you are and all the beautiful information that you share. And I think what I pray for going forward for our society is, may we come back to a place where we can have wonderful, nuanced conversations, where we can be in wonderment, right? Instead of in all the certainty. Everyone's always so certain. Well, can we go back to wonderment, and can we go back to common sense? And maybe if we mix common sense with wonderment and a sense of awe and humility about life, maybe then we can start rectifying this weird trajectory that we've been on, strictly speaking, since probably 2011, but then 2020 is, when things got really pear-shaped. So I hope we can go back to some kind of new normal. The old normal, or normal, doesn't exist anymore. A last word of wisdom.
Well, I think, probably I would maybe take away from what we talked about here on this podcast, which is that so many people are confused because they hear conflicting things. And, a lot of that just comes from not having done this stuff long enough. It takes a really, really, really long time to see things play out. And so I think the more that you kind of factor that into the equation, just ask, well, this piece of advice, what were they doing, 10 years ago? It helps you to kind of take things with a grain of salt. I think I kind of see it that way.
100%. Thank you so much, Joel. And I'll continue chewing away at your wonderful courses, all of the information. And I think, to me, what's exciting is that there's so much that we can do and that we can bring in. And then who cares if it takes me 5 more years to do all the things, to integrate them all in, right? Like, I'm more for, can we, that's sort of the last thing that I want to mention, because it's such a big point that you bring in. Have more longer term goals and visions for your health, for your life, rather than all of these short term goals, trying to fix things from the outside, when then in reality nothing has actually changed, because you have not learned new habits, new ways of relating to your food, to your fitness journey, and so forth. So that's another big point that I really enjoy about your teachings, is you allow people to have a long-term vision, which is so crucial. Thank you so much,
Well,
Joel.
thank you. Thanks for having me. Good talk.